Floridians should have the privacy of their data and personal information protected, their ability to access and participate in online platforms protected, and their ability to participate in elections free from interference from big tech protected. What began as a group of upstart technology companies from the West Coast has since transformed into an industry of monopoly communications platforms that monitor, influence, and control the flow of information in our country and among our citizens, and they do that to an extent hitherto unimaginable. At the turn of the 21st century, online technology represented tools to liberate Americans from reliance on distrusted legacy media outlets. As social media proliferated over the past decade, citizens could directly connect with large numbers of people and could cut out corporate media outlets entirely. Over the years, however, these platforms have changed from neutral platforms that provided Americans with the freedom to speak to enforcers of preferred narratives. Consequently, these platforms have played an increasingly decisive role in elections and have negatively impacted Americans who dissent from orthodoxies favored by the big tech cartel. And we have seen the power of their censorship over individuals and organizations, including what I believe is clear viewpoint discrimination. And as these companies have grown and their influence expanded, big tech has come to look more like Big Brother with each passing day. But this is 2021, not 1984, and this is real life, not George Orwell's fiction. These companies exert monopoly power over a centrally important forum of public discourse and the access of information that Floridians rely on. It used to be that consumers were trusted to make their own decisions about what information to consume, about which leaders to, quote, follow, about what news to watch. Now those decisions are increasingly made by nameless, faceless boards of censors. They even have a name, euphemistically called content moderators. And we're told that these are private companies and that those who disagree with their decisions to regulate content and even suppress content can simply choose other services. Well, when 2.8 million Americans chose to download the application Parler and share information with friends, family, and colleagues, what was the result of that? Canceled by Amazon, Google, and Apple. What about the 88 million Americans who chose to, quote, follow President Donald Trump? Sorry, content moderators on Twitter pulled the plug, as did a different set of, quote, moderators at Facebook. This is the case even though leaders like Ayatollah Khamenei have been permitted to use these platforms to do things like call for the destruction of Israel and the elimination of Jews. The core issue here is this: are consumers going to have the choice to consume the information they choose, or are oligarchs in Silicon Valley going to make those choices for us? No group of people should exercise such power, especially not tech billionaires in Northern California. Now, if I had to choose, I'd rather be governed by the first 50 names in the Tallahassee phone book than the CEOs of big tech companies. If you don't like Parler, then don't read it. Let's not have those choices made for us, or before long we will have nothing more than someone else's choices imposed upon us by a bunch of monopolies whose core business is to sell advertising. These behaviors are concerning to me, as I know they are concerning to many Floridians. It's high time that we step up to the plate to ensure the protection of the people and their rights. And I'm committed to addressing what may be one of the most pervasive threats to American self-government in the 21st century, because I believe in individual rights, privacy rights, and property rights, because I trust Floridians to choose which content to consume and which to ignore, and because I want to preserve Florida's rich, diverse public discourse and not allow corporate-owned, narrative-approved outlets to dominate our voices. Now, fortunately, I'm not alone in this fight, and I'm glad to work with the Speaker of the House and other legislative leaders as we take on these issues on behalf of the people of Florida. As we work together, we're united under core beliefs in the sacredness of one's voice, one's privacy, and the protection they deserve in our system of government. Privacy rights are really property rights, and just like big tech can't rummage through your dresser drawers, they also aren't entitled to track your every move. You know, someone once summed it up to me this way: when I invite you into my house and say, have a seat, I don't mean you can leave with my couch. Our founding fathers were deliberate in the enshrinement of our rights in the Constitution to ensure that we, the people, We're guaranteed protection against those wishing to violate our rights. Ironically, our early founders were most concerned with the tyranny of government in deciding these rights, but today, the big tech oligarchy has in many ways become a clearer and more present danger to the restriction of the right to free speech than the government itself. And certainly, if you go back and look at the monopolies at the turn of the 20th century, these current big tech monopolies are exerting power far more pervasive than Standard Oil ever did. Now, these issues are so important because of big tech's pervasiveness and near limitless influence in our society. With billions of monthly users and the vastness of information exchange, not only do these companies control the flow of information, they are selling it as well. This is how you think the business works. They take consumer data, sell it for advertising, specifically more than $200 billion worth of advertising in a given year. And that's not really innovation. That's just a different form of Madison Avenue. Now, since its inception, big tech has experienced rapid and extraordinary growth. Its path to expansion bore a willingness to engage in a host of savvy practices to advance profit while compromising the protection of consumers. Not only do Floridians share with these platforms their lives, thoughts, hopes, and stories, but also some of their most intimate personal information. But what most folks don't realize is that all these companies are taking that information, regardless of its sensitivity, and selling it to whoever is willing to pay the highest price. They've even created complex markets and exchanges for the sale of Floridians' information, all the while claiming to never sell user information. Florida's not going to be tolerating that. Florida consumers deserve protection for their privacy. And with the help of our legislative partners, we're going to stand together in support of Floridians and put a stop to big tech's practice of preying on consumers. Your privacy is important. We also are going to address censorship and deplatforming. Now, these network of Silicon Valley CEOs wield extraordinary power to the point of holistically controlling the flow of vast swaths of information in our country. In a matter of hours, a business can be dismantled, a community of friends and colleagues canceled, and even a sitting president of the United States silenced. By their own admission, social media companies view themselves as a new public square and are happy to market themselves as platforms of global, regional, and local connectivity. Make no mistake, they are nothing more than advertising conglomerates, and I'm not interested in handing over the keys to the public square to a bunch of companies whose economic interests are not aligned with the public interest. When it comes to the rightful criticism for their editing and manipulation of the public square, big tech executives flee to shelter themselves from accountability as anything but a public forum, and that they have the chutzpah, the nerve, to insist on broad liability protection. Heads they win, tails we lose. And worse yet, a faceless and nameless group of tech employees at these companies now wield tremendous power to censor speech and enforce their viewpoint on political discourse upon the general public. If George Orwell had thought of it, he would have loved the term content moderation. Consequences of big tech censorship are felt far and wide. Take, for example, big tech's approach to censoring criticism of pseudo-scientific lockdowns during the coronavirus pandemic. Well, these lockdowns were almost universally rejected in pre-COVID pandemic preparedness plans. Lockdowns at the time of the pandemic were favored by the, quote, narrative. And so in the name of, quote, science, articles and posts warning against lockdowns were taken down and censored. The result has been the destruction of millions of lives across America, as well as increased deaths from suicide, substance abuse, and despair, without any corresponding benefit in COVID mortality. Shouldn't such monumental policy questions have received a full, open, and robust debate? Social media platforms have become among the most powerful mechanism for a private citizen to make his or her voice heard. It is incumbent upon us to ensure those voices are not capriciously and vindictively targeted. And the worst part, they change the rules constantly based on whatever they deem to be politically correct at any given point in time. These rules and standards are often changed without the knowledge of their users, moving the goalposts on Floridians and others who use these open forums for discourse and as a source for information. When a social media company applies these standards unequally on users, this is discrimination, pure and simple. Can you imagine tolerating this kind of behavior in banking or in healthcare or in other industries? So today we announced during this legislative session that we will seek to do the following. Ensure that Floridians are safeguarded against these practices from technology companies by requiring proper notice and disclosure of these changes to the standards and full disclosure of any actions taken against a user for violating the standards. We'll also seek to prevent these platforms from rapidly changing these standards and applying them unequally against users. We'll also require that users be provided the option to opt out of the various algorithms these platforms use to steer content, or in many cases, suppress content from the view of other users. But these provisions are of no use without enforcement, and we will provide recourse for Floridians both by enabling a user to bring a cause of action against a technology company for violating these requirements of Florida law and empowering the Attorney General to bring action against the technology company for violations of these requirements under Florida's Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act. We've also seen the breadth of big tech's influence on campaigns and elections. While there wasn't a state in the union that ran a better election than Florida last year, we still saw on a national scale how articles, candidates, and content had the thumbprints of big tech executives all over them. You can look no further than the last several months of the election as coordinated, calculated efforts were undertaken to advance an increasingly evident political agenda of the big tech companies. The problem is, these companies are playing a significant role in the advancement of issues and candidates, but do so without recording many of their efforts for what they are, political contributions. If I were to give something of value to a candidate or political committee, it would be a contribution. But big tech has been manipulating news content and designing algorithms to give the upper hand to their candidates of choice, and they do so scot-free. Again, euphemistically called content moderation. I think it's more political manipulation. That's why in Florida we're going to take action. We're going to take aim at those companies and pull back the veil and make sure these guys don't continue to find loopholes and gray areas to live above the law. Under our proposal, if a technology company deplatforms a candidate for elected office in Florida during an election, a company will face a daily fine of $100,000 until the candidate's access to the platform is restored. Again, any Floridian can deplatform any candidate they choose. You simply unsubscribe, and it's a right that I believe belongs with the citizen. Further, if a technology company promotes a candidate for office against another, the value of that free promotion must be recorded as a political campaign contribution enforced by the Florida Elections Commission. And lastly, if a technology company uses their content and user-related algorithms to suppress or prioritize the access of any content related to a political candidate or cause on the ballot, that company will also face daily fines. The message is loud and clear. When it comes to elections in Florida, big tech should stay out of it. Now, big tech has long since abdicated the protection of consumers for the pursuit of profit. We can't allow Floridians' privacy to be violated, their voices and even their livelihoods diminished, and their elections interfered with. And with that, I'd like to invite Speaker Sprowls up